Evening, everyone. First of all, happy Pi Day. Today is Pi Day for the mathematical 3.14 equation. So it seems very fitting that we're going to have a conversation about our budgets today. So tonight you'll hear from Dr. Carmine Peluso, our superintendent, and Sean Farr, our chief financial officer, as we have a review of the district's revenue and expenditures in our annual budget process. Tonight's webinar is intended to simply talk about the process itself and not necessarily our actual budget tonight. So just want to put that out there. In addition, we will be fielding questions from Facebook and YouTube on anything presented in regards to the budget process tonight. And then I'll also go into Balancing Act, which is the participatory budgeting tool that the RCSD has selected to move forward with participatory budgeting. In addition, for the audience watching tonight's, again, meeting will look very different. It is a webinar intended to yield questions from community members and parents and students who may be watching tonight on Facebook and YouTube. And this is, board commissioners are not required to be here tonight, but we thank those that made it out into the blistering winter weather to get here tonight. And in addition, we will not take questions or comments from any of our commissioners tonight, again, as this is intended to accept questions from those watching over YouTube and Facebook. And that process will look like our staff behind the scenes will be monitoring both of those channels and taking the questions right from the comment sections, and our board clerk will be reading those questions out loud, and the superintendent or CFO will answer those questions as they come in. So with that, thank you all for being here tonight. In addition, if you are watching this after this ends, you will still have an opportunity to submit questions, and those questions will be part of our budget process and will be available for the audience to view as we move forward in the budget deliberations and so forth. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our superintendent, Dr. Carmine Peluso, so he can discuss the annual budget process.
Thank you, Vice President LeBron. Welcome, President Elliott, Vice President LeBron, board commissioners, and those watching on YouTube and Facebook. So today we're just going to kind of go through what a budget process is, and I'll have our Chief Financial Officer speak a little bit about, revenue and expenditures and how those are balancing. But as you know, every year the Board of Education is required to adopt a balanced budget for the period of July 1st to June 30th. And in simplest forms, a balanced budget is just when projected expenditures, what we're expending out, are matched with what our anticipated and projected revenues are for the year, and revenues coming from aid as well as other sources that we will discuss later. And then we have what we refer to as a fund balance, and you'll see, and we'll be reporting out over time, a fund balance is just that, our savings. And we are healthy with a fund balance, and we will continue to be healthy with our fund balance, but that does not mean that fund balance could be used for reoccurring costs, right? It's not fiscally sound practice for us to do that. And so we have to limit the allocation of how to balance the budget using fund balance. When we, in the past, have traditionally used extensive amount of fund balance, that's when we ran into troubles with our budget, and we ran into situations where we were in a deficit because we relied heavily on our fund balance to help balance our budget. And we need to get out of the practice of doing that. So the budget process for 23-24, we began this in October of 2022. We recognized that last year's budget process was not the smoothest or where we wanted it to be. So we began this process earlier this year in October in 2022, and that started with departments submitting their requests for staffing and funding and alignments to goals and objectives of the district, right? And we really need to work with our staff, and have worked on our staff, is looking at their funding as not always being adds, but also to kind of reorganize themselves or reallocate money to best meet the needs of the students. And we can't continuously add and add and add, especially when we're faced with some numbers that are declining based on enrollment. And so based on estimates from the state and other sources, the district develops our revenue projections for the budget. And the requested expenditures are matched up against the revenue, and adjustments are made to bring the budget in balance. So right now, when we present on March 23rd, we're going to present a draft budget that we know may need some movement to get to a final adopted budget, but on March 23rd, we will be facing and presenting a draft budget to the board and the community. To go a little bit more further into revenue and expenses, I'm going to turn it over to our Chief Financial Officer, Sean Farr.
Thank you, Superintendent Peluso. Want to just try to give some context here that with terminology that is probably confusing to the average person, but school districts and governmental entities work on what's called fund accounting system. So think of funds as buckets of money. And so what we're talking about here tonight is what's called the general fund budget, the general operating budget that supports the operation of the district. There's also various grants that come in and various funding sources, and that's in what's called a special aid fund. We also have food service is in a fund, and we also have debt service in a fund. So just think of kind of separate buckets. So tonight we're talking about the general fund, which is the majority of the money that is used to operate the district. And so we have a slide here where we're breaking down the revenue to give you an idea of what the funding sources are that are used to fund the school district. And we have a nice little chart here, and you can see, I guess what I would call purple is 83%. 83% of our funding for this district comes from New York State. Comes in the form of various categories of aid and various grants from the state. So obviously, we were highly dependent on what happens with the state and what funding comes from the state and decisions that are made down the road in Albany and those resources that come to us. Supplementing that, and not a small amount, is what comes from the city of Rochester itself, $119,100,000. It's 14%. So that's money that is collected by the city primarily from property taxes that is provided to help support the operation of the school district. So those two right there is 97% of our funding. So there are some other categories, what are called local funding, which is primarily interest income. We have some health services that we provide that we bill back for other students from other school districts. And there's a category called indirect charges. So indirect is when you administer grants. So like the federal stimulus money, we get to charge a rate against that, which is about 9.8%. That we use to pay for our costs to administer those funds. So for 23-24, which is the last year of the federal stimulus and a large amount, we're projecting a large indirect charge. In 24-25, that will then go back down because we'll have smaller grant amounts that we're charging against. And then we also get some funding from the federal government. We bill out for Medicaid reimbursement for services that are provided to eligible students. That's a couple $1 million. And then there's also a federal loan subsidy program that we had participated in for debt service. Then Superintendent had mentioned about use of fund balance. So what we're proposing for 23-24 is to appropriate $5 million of fund balance, but it's going to be specifically targeted for non-recurring expenses. And the concern is basically emergency expenses that come up related to facilities or other things that can happen in the course of a school year. So we thought it'd be prudent to not only set aside funds for that, but to also to identify it. So there's a process that'll be put in place for the board to be informed and to participate when the superintendent makes recommendations on expenditures from those accounts. So in total, if you go to the next slide, you'll see that the total revenue for the general fund is about $871 million. This is, in this chart here, you can see on the far lower right-hand side that it's $35 million higher than the current year budget. And where those resources came from is we had a large increase, we were proposed, it's in the governor's budget, we'll see how that plays out in the next few weeks, $49 million increase in what's called foundation aid, which for the state is their primary general funding that they provide school districts. And they had made some adjustments to the formula. They're actually funding the full formula proposed for 23-24. That increased us by $49 million just in that item alone. But the assembly being the assembly, they also gave us $49 million with a set aside of $4 million for certain projects. So the net is about $45 million. And you can see that while we're getting that extra $49 million, but we're only going up 35, and that's because there's other funding sources within the state fund that are declining. And so the net is at $35 million, which is significant, and also will not reoccur in 24-25. So a lot of what we're talking about for 23-24 is also positioning ourselves for what is 24-25 look like. So that's the revenue aspect, and there's certain assumptions that we're making behind that, and so there's a page here of items of what's going on here. That the foundation aid formula was fully funded. We're getting increase in chargebacks or indirect cost from federal stimulus money. Our interest income is going up because we actually have more cash. We're in a very strong cash position, combined with the fact that investment interest rates have gone up, and so we're benefiting from that. Contrasting that is that the transportation, our transportation costs have actually declined. We've implemented some efficiencies in our operation that have resulted in savings. So that's good, but also transportation is one of the items that are aided by the state. So even though we're more efficient and controlling our costs better in transportation, then we get less aid. So on the revenue side, you're seeing a decline there. I had mentioned we're looking to set aside $5 million in fund balance for emergency projects. We have part of, we'll see it on the expenditure side, charter schools. While charter school enrollments go up, one of the aids is that the state provides transition aid for charter schools that phases out over a period of time. So as we lose students, they're providing us some funds to transition to reduce costs. And so that will continue to increase because the number of charter school students has been increasing. And then all of certainly all the state is all dependent upon the state budget, which is targeted for April 1st. We'll see. It looks like it may be a little late this year because of some things that are happening politically. But somewhere shortly after April 1st, we'll know what our actual revenues are. They'll be locked in when the budget is approved. Moving on to the expense side. So again, balanced budget. So we have $871 million in revenue. We have $871 million in expenses. And so this is breaking down into categories that are what we call object codes. So, but you'll see that between compensation, $317 million, and benefits, $161 million, that more than 50% of our budget just goes to employees, their salaries and benefit costs. And that makes sense. Education, K-12 education is a labor-intensive business, right? So we're in the business of having teachers work directly with students. And so those costs are a large part. You can see that there's a category called contractual, which is maybe kind of vague. That's about $250 million. But a large part of this is, the subset is charter schools. So we're budgeting $113 million in tuition paid out to charter schools for students public school students who attend charter schools in our district. And then also, we contract for a good portion of our transportation that we provide. We do some in-house in district, but a good portion of that is contracted out, and so that is showing up here, and that is $55 million of that number. So you can start to see, as you fill in this little circle here, you can see that that is the bulk of it. Another large number, it's called inter-fund transfers. That's more of a accounting terminology, but the bulk of that is actually where our debt service resides, the payments that we make on bonds and debts that we've issued over time. So that is $95 million there. And then we also spend quite a fair amount with the BOCES, the Boards of Cooperative Education Services, which are organized in New York. Those are primarily, in our case, for special education students. And you can see that that's $27 million. So that's where we would be using BOCES to provide specialized education services for students that we're unable to provide directly ourselves as the district. Going on to the next slide, you'll see these numbers kind of summarized here. Going down, if you look at the 23-24 draft column, and you go down, these are categories that are established by the state. But you can look and say instruction is of the total $871 million in the general fund. $465 million of that is classified as instruction, so that's primarily teachers and schools, buildings. Transportation in total, $77 million. The benefits for employees, $164 million. Debt service, $97 million. And I point out there's a small number there under the item community support, and it actually shows it's going down. That number, these data points came from a run that we had as of March 1st, and those have since been updated, so that number is actually, the current number is $246,000 is what's being budgeted, as opposed to the smaller number. And that's just reflective. There's a lot of changes that go on, kind of what I call micro changes. It happens to be this is a small number, and so that micro change reflected of a negative number. I don't want people to think that we're reducing funding for community support, because we're not. And then some assumptions around that. Obviously, employee compensation benefits is our main cost driver. We have 5,800 employees currently in the district, so that is our major expense. I had previously mentioned charter schools. We're projecting to go past 7,800 students next school year in charter schools. That translates to $113 million in tuition. Utility costs, we're no different than you at your home with your own utility costs, except we have a lot of facilities. So when you take all our facilities and you take those cost increase and you add up, it adds up to a lot of money for us. And so that is a continuing cost increase that is really hard for us to control. And we do have some changes. We are projecting, we have had declining enrollment in the district for well over 10 years, continuous declining, and we're projecting that to continue into 23-24. But as we have fewer students, there's some cost areas that actually decline as a result of that. So one of those is what you would out-of-district placements of students. Placed out of district for various reasons, so that is declining only because we have fewer students. Now behind this is we have started to look at the need to reduce budgeted positions, and I distinguish that between filled positions. So when I said we have 5,800 employees, we have well over 6,000 budgeted positions right now. So at any one time, we have positions that are not filled, vacant. And some of those, for a variety of reasons, are not filled over a long time. And so we're looking to start to reduce those vacancies in an effort to balance the budget. And we'll turn it back over to Superintendent Peluso to talk about federal stimulus.
Thank you. So just wanted to kind of remind everyone, this is our general fund budget, right? And we have some federal funding that we've used over the last few years that will be coming to an end. CURSA funds, which is, they end on September 23rd, that we have some positions, and then ARP ends on 9/24. And if we remember, when the federal government gave those federal fundings, they said these should not be used for personnel, right? They should be used for, non-recurring costs. But truth be told, when we entered back from the pandemic, there was a strong need for additional supports that we needed to use our ARP for. If it was building subs to deal with the number of teachers out because they were going out with COVID symptoms. We needed to invest in people. That money is coming to an end in 9/24, right? That currently has 227 full-time employees in our ARP funding. We have contracts that support our district in that ARP funding. Right now, what we have to do and work with our team to do is evaluate those services. And as this money runs out and comes to an end, we're going to need to look at our overall budget and then what was working in our ARP and Cursor and see how we allocate those funds, what goes and what stays, because after when we hit 9/20/24 and we budget for 24/25, that money will no longer be available for us. So there's going to be, as we go forward in the 24/25 conversations, some harder discussions around what is working, what's been evaluated through ARP, and what has been a benefit to the district, but also then what potentially we need to give up on the other side of the expense side to keep those services in place. So there's going to be some real tough decisions as we move forward for 24/25 that I just want to put in there right now, as well as where our enrollment goes, our 5-year plan in terms of the number of buildings that we have. All of those decisions will be coming really for 24-25 as we get through this 23-24 budget. I do want to make sure we keep that in mind.
And just to follow up on that, earlier I was talking about various funds. So the numbers that I was previously reviewing was the general fund. The federal stimulus funds are in what we call the special aid fund, or think of it grants fund. So that for 23-24 is well in excess of $100 million. Now, when we put together the budget book with all the detail, obviously that detail is included in that budget book, and the whole picture is brought to bear. We'll talk about next steps, what this budget process, and the superintendent had previously mentioned, we had started the process internally back in October of 22. But now we're starting, we've kind of pulled together all this internal data. We've looked, we've organized, we've tried to align our resources with the strategies and goals and objectives of the district. And now we're really into the actual kind of public portion of it. And the kind of the first big step of that is March 23rd, which is a regular business meeting of the board. What we call the budget book will be provided to the board at that time, and it'll also be posted on our website. And this is a comprehensive document that has substantial amount of detail in it. And so then we'll start the process really for the board to have hearings, and the board has a series of 3 hearings that occur in April, and based on those hearings and input from the board, then adjustments will be made. So when we say we have this budget book, it's a draft, and then based on what comes out of the hearings, adjustments will be made to that book, and then we'll create a final budget book that'll be presented to the board. It's scheduled to be presented on May 9th to actually adopt the budget for 23-24. But we're also a component, the school district's a component of the city of Rochester, and so there are other legal timelines there. And so after the Board of Education adopts the budget, there's then May 26th is scheduled a budget hearing by City Council. That's followed on June 8th by a joint City Council Board public hearing that will occur. And then ultimately June 20th is the date set aside for the City Council to vote on the district budget. All these are in advance of July 1 when the actual fiscal year starts. So there's a lot of opportunities for input, and we definitely encourage people to provide. The budget is complex. In total, we're $1.1 billion annual operation. So when you get down to the detail, that there's a lot of stuff going on in this district, and so there's a lot to talk about and a lot to discuss as far as priorities. So that's the kind of the process there. The next few months as the budget unveils, and I'll turn it over to Vice President LeBron.
Thank you. So Balancing Act is the tool that we're going to be using as we move forward for participatory budgeting. And participatory budgeting, for those who don't know, is really meant to be a tool to give communities a voice. Lots of community-based organizations have started to roll out even in funding world, right, the foundations, in ways to have community have input on things that get funded. And so we will be using the tool essentially in the same way, but also to collect input on the budget as we move forward. This has been a very heavy lift, so I definitely want to thank our finance team internally and our board staff, because this has not been an easy lift and has been in the making for the last 2 years, it feels like. And I feel like we're finally starting to make some headway with it. And one of the things I wanted to use the tool to gather input on was the development of the budget book. And so I know we're having conversations about a budget book. There's going to be something presented on the 23rd, but we are hoping that getting input from both parents, students, and community members, and our staff, and all other stakeholders in this process, that we can walk away with a book that is just as comprehensive and required by New York State law, the pieces that we're required to have in there, but also more digestible than the book that we have developed over the course of many, many years in the district. And so Rahima has the tool up, so you should be able to see it. This is what it looks like when you log on to it. It'll give you a message. This is still in the preview stage, and we are hoping to have it live tonight so that folks can start going in. But for example, if you go to, and so you can, Rahima, can you close out of that screen right there? Click on the Buffalo School District, and all the way to the left on the top, the first little square. Thank you. It'll show you some of the sheets for the school districts and what they look like. So they are very different from district to district. And I'll give an example. Syracuse School District has a picture of the school, which I really like, and some demographics, and we actually have similar demographics, but not all. So Syracuse points out all of the community partners in that school, as well as the student population, the student need indicators, the school status, where they're at. It also highlights the grants that that school receives, the number of teachers, classroom benefits, and costs and so forth that are there, as well as the demographics. Some other school districts don't do that. We have gone back and forth on sharing some of those data pieces in the past, having them removed last year, or adapted and changed. And so this will give us a better comprehensive way to collect feedback from the community as to what this book should look like moving forward for years to come. And it's not going to be, like I said, even an easy lift internally to do that, and we are going to be looking at even partnering outside externally to help support this work so that we can do it correctly and comprehensively once the selection is made. So when you all get a chance, please, we will make it live by tomorrow morning. I will give staff some time to get here and read and make it live, and hopefully right on the homepage. So folks who are watching tonight or watching this later on will have an opportunity to give input. In the tool itself, there's also a box that says Other. If there is another school district that you believe has a better budget book that's easier and more comprehensive than the ones that we've selected, please give that suggestion. We absolutely will look at those as well and pull out best practices. And your suggestions could be, I like portions of Elmira and Yonkers and Syracuse, and these are the portions that I like. There are links to go to their websites if you wanted to go and look at the entire book in its entirety for the community to go and see. But this is going to be so critical for our community to have a say in this in a way that they can digest this information. Another big piece I do want to uplift is that internally we're having conversations about translation services for these materials. And I know that we are having conversations and identifying 2 key committees, which would be finance stuff being translated in multiple languages, but certainly minimally Spanish, as well as information that comes out of the ESA meeting, because that is student accountability data pieces and academic data that is being discussed, and parents should have a right to have access to those materials in their language. So I just wanted to put that out there because we are working on those things, and as we move forward and have a final budget book, The goal is that that book would also be translated in the future so that it's available in multiple languages for families to also have access to as we move forward. So I just want us to be aware that in the community be aware that we're aware that this has been an ongoing issue as well, and it is an access issue for many families that some of the biggest, most important pieces that we talk about, student academics and finances, are not available currently in different languages. But we are working on that, and I just wanted to highlight that that is something that we're working on as we move forward. So I will turn it over to our board clerk to see if there are any questions at this time. Thank you.
Good evening. There are no questions on, excuse me, there are no questions online at this time. Oh, we do have one question from the audience, which Chief Lopez will read.
Good evening, Commissioners. I have a question from a parent in our audience. The question reads, the presentation referenced that the budget is created in alignment with the strategic plan. Has a new plan been adopted to ensure the budget aligns with the new administration's vision? If not, how are you planning to adjust to that to ensure spending aligns with long-term vision?
Thank you. So currently, we're working off of the strategic plan that was created under the prior superintendent. We are in the process of going out for a request for proposal, reviewing a new strategic plan process for for future years moving forward. That we're kicking off hopefully within the next month or so. So this has been built off of a strategic plan that ends at the end of this year, but we are on a new strategic planning process for future years.
I would also like to add that there is a long-range financial plan that the budget also has to align with as required by the state monitor, and something that the district has already been working on and will be presented to the public shortly. And there is a question that I see on YouTube, if you want to. Yep.
There's a question online. How do we build upgraded expenses in the facilities modernization program? Oh, my apologies. How do building upgraded expenses and facilities modernization programs fit within the budget?
Thank you. Very good question. That is a great question. And our facilities modernization program is a separate bucket of money that we have $475 million that we are going through a planning process that it would be separate from these funds here. But it does impact also as we move forward in the budget for long-range planning in terms of what it is that we need in terms of inventory of buildings, what our future looks like based on enrollment. So that is part of our decisions and how many students are enrolled in buildings. So FMP is separate. It's $475 million that we will move through with state approval and governor's approval that is separate from this budget.
Maybe I could add to that as well. So phase 3 is $475 million, and it is a separate process. But ultimately, when the $475 million takes the form of debt that's issued, and then that debt becomes debt service that comes back into the general fund. But New York provides aid, a certain level of aid behind that money. So the FMP process goes, but ultimately that debt service comes back in the general fund expense, but then there's also revenue that matches a fair amount of that. So that'll show up in future years when the project actually gets to the point where they actually issue bonds.
I just wanted to clarify in the presentation too that on the slide for April, it says board budget hearings. We call them deliberations, and just to break down that there is one public hearing, and that is going to be posted on the RCSD website. And when you click on it, right now it's on the landing page for the budget for the information. So if you go right onto our landing page and click on that, all of the dates are listed there. And so for the public hearing, that date is listed already, but I do want to point out that the deliberations are meant for commissioners to ask the administration questions. Those are public, you can attend, but we do not have speakers at those deliberations, and we follow the same process that all their government bodies here locally and at the state follow for deliberations. But there is an opportunity for the public hearing, and that traditional public hearing is happening April 12th. And so that is an opportunity for individuals to sign up and advocate for things that they feel should be in the budget or they would like to see in the budget moving forward. Thank you.
We don't have any other questions from online at this time.
Seeing that there are no other questions, I am going to end this budget webinar for today. However, I do want to point out that after tonight's meeting, if anyone has any questions about this presentation or even the tool, please feel free to email us at publicbudgetwebinar@rcsdk12.org. That email is also on the presentation, which is available on our website and on board docs. And with that, have a good night, everyone, and again, happy Pi Day.